Good morning and welcome to all for this our fourth session of Islamic Architectural Legacy course. And as I am also a student, I am always tried for to take the notes. And I humble request to all of you that जिन्होंने अभी तक अपने notes share नहीं किए हैं, so please share your notes, daily notes, on the email ID of Nasrin Madam, or you can send on my WhatsApp number also. सो ये याद रखिए, ये कोर्स है, सिर्फ एक लेक्चर सीरीज नहीं है. सो हम सभी को नोट्स लेना जो है, असाइनमेंट्स इज एन कंपल्शन. आपका कोई एग्जाम नहीं होगा, मगर हमारे डेली असाइनमेंट जो है वो हम सभी को कंप्लीट करना आवश्यक है. सो नाउ आई एम हम्बली रिक्वेस्ट टू नसरीन मैडम, प्लीज स्टार्ट आवर टुडे सेशन. Please unmute yourself. Please unmute. You are muted.
Okay, sir.
And request to other all, please off your audio and video. जिन लोगों को इतनी बार अगर हम ग्रुप में लिखे भी समझ में नहीं आता है, प्लीज कीप योर ऑडियो एंड वीडियो म्यूट. Okay, ma'am, please continue.
Good morning, everybody. I'll just open my screen. You can see my screen, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Welcome back for Islamic Architectural Legacy in Lands of Islam for the day 4. So today's topic would be the Seljuks frontier, the Seljuks and the new frontiers in India and Anatolia, and also we will look into the Mongols and Ilkhanids. But before coming to this session, I would like to also share from the previous class, we had some more important monuments from Fatimids, later Fatimids era. So we will just look into this first and then we'll start today's class. So here, as we remember, Jawahar, he had constructed the Cairo, and he had constructed the mud wall, as you can see over here. And also we discussed about the East and West Palace, and we also discussed about the Al-Azhar Mosque and Al-Akmar Mosque. So here today we will be looking into the architecture of Badr al-Jamali. So after Badr al-Jamali became vizier, he made several renovations, and also he did lot of additions to urban structures of Cairo. So here the old mud brick wall, which was constructed by Jawahar, it was replaced with cut stone, as you can see here. This is the wall near the north and the south. So he added and he enlarged the space of Cairo. So at this point we can see the Al-Hakim Mosque. It has come inside the Cairo. Earlier it was outside. And then this new wall also required the construction of gates, or it is also called as babs. So you can see the gates here, one here, and one over here. So this was like new versions of existing ones. So the new gates were from stone. So much of the stone that was used for new walls of the gates were taken from pharaonic sites, like from Memphis, Giza, and also from Hierapolis. So they were likely also like from Roman and Byzantine sites used like a quarry for this construction for the stone. They were using that as a quarry site. So here Christian architects were invited to construct these wall gates. So here you can see this is Bab al-Zuwayya, Bab al-Nasr, and this is Bab al-Futtu. So here you can see that Bab al-Futtu, Bab al-Nasr, and Bab al-Zuwayya. Bab means it's a gate. The style and appearance of the gates, as well as the structural technology, is entirely Armenian and Syrian. So throughout the whole region in the early medieval, in this period, there is a commonality in stone construction found among the monuments which were built by Christian architects. So basically they were from Armenia. So one of the main feature, apart from the sober decoration, is the use of rounded arches. So coming to the Mosque of Al-Akmar, this mosque I'll show the location over here. So this is the Mosque of Al-Akmar, which is near to the palace and also near this palace ground. Sorry, the parade ground. So the Mosque of Al-Akmar was built in 1125 by the 10th Fatimid Caliph Al-Amir. So viziers were key patrons in this period of Fatimid rule, and this was the third congregational mosque that was built under the Fatimids in Cairo. But it is very small in comparison to the Al-Azhar and also Al-Hakim mosques. It is also the first to be built in close proximity to the palaces and this parade ground. Parade ground, it's called as Bain al-Kasrain. So it has an unusual plan, as you can see here, due to the existing street pattern over here. So, and it needs to meet the Qibla orientation. This was the Qibla orientation. So the street was something like this. So as the orientation of the street could not be changed, the angle of the mosque facade had to be reconciled with the requirements of the Qibla. So a small entry portal here was added to disguise the fact that one enters from the street, one is making a gradual turn towards the courtyard and also towards the true Qibla orientation. So here, the facade is an extraordinary display of carved stone with the entire surface treated as a series of keel-shaped ridges that rise over the niches. So here you can see these are the keel shape. You can see over here also, here also. So certain formal features of these design components can be compared to Fatimid mihrabs. So these mihrabs, like they act like a pseudomorphism. So pseudomorphism means in this they appear to be mihrabs, but they share the same form, but lacking the actual function of the mihrab. So again, there are also smaller sections of mukarnas, as you can see over here, or stalactite vaults. So you can also have, you can see here the bands of inscriptions, which are in the lower and also in the upper levels. Then there is a basic tripartite arrangements with the projecting portal at the central, treated in different tiers of recessed niches with a keel-shaped form. And also there are smaller medallions and discs containing geometrical ornaments and also inscriptions. So here, the inscriptions are historical, they are recording the building's foundation under Al-Amir. And there are other references to the Quran that emphasize the link between Prophet Muhammad and also the first Shiite Imam. So this is done with a goal of projecting the absolute legitimacy of the descendants. So here you can see the disc that is inside the central arc above the main entrance had a close relationship to the design of Fatimid coins from that period. Radiating circles of inscriptions on the gold coins are found arranged in a pierced stucco components here. So in the later period of Fatimid era, it became increasingly very difficult to build within the fabric of Cairo because it became so congested. So here you can see the Cairo, it was so congested. Urban design challenges became more intense into the 14th and 15th centuries of Fatimid era. So now we'll stop here about the Fatimids. Actually, in Cairo, we have many more monuments, more than 500 monuments, which are under this UNESCO World Heritage Sites. But then due to time constraints, I have taken very few, and later also in some other dynasties, some famous buildings I have taken. We will come back to that in future sessions again. So now I'll start with the Seljuks and the new frontiers in the India and Anatolia, and also Mongols in Ilkhanis. In this part, the artistic and architectural developments from 1050 to 1250 will be discussed, with a major focus on the mosque and hospital complex in Devrigi in north-central Anatolia. So these examples I have taken. So before that, let's understand a little bit of historical context. So Turkic Seljuks conquered Baghdad and ended the period of Buyid Shi'i rule. Late Abbasid caliphs based in Baghdad were no longer able to rule their own, so they needed supporters. So these Sunni Seljuks came from east, and they legitimized themselves as rescuing the Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad from the hands of these Shiite Buyid sultans. So as the caliphs began to lose power, a new partnership between the caliph and the sultanate emerged. So the Persianate concept of kingship based on justice was promoted by the Seljuk sultans. The caliphs provided religious legitimacy to the sultans. And here, Sufism began to rise and it became important as well. This period marked the appearance of Turkish, Kurdish, and also Berber dynasties. And also you can see two new frontiers emerged in the frontier regions of Anatolia and India. So the appearance of crusaders at the end of 11th century created political instability in the Eastern Islamic world. The establishment of Latin Christian kingdoms was an important threat to Abbasids and also for Fatimids caliphates. And in Egypt, Fatimid rule was brought to an end and Sunni authority was established again. So in 11th century, Seljuk armies advanced into Anatolia, that is the region of Rum or the Byzantine Roman territories, and they established their capital at Konya. The sack of Baghdad and the murder of the last Abbasid caliph, that is Al-Mutasim, by the pagan Mongols, that is Genghis Khan, in 1258 was a major turning point in the history of Islamic art and architecture, as well as the political context of the larger Islamic world. So the rule of Genghis Khan, who was a Mongolian, created a break whereby the Abbasid Caliphate was completely annihilated. So coming to the developments of art and architecture in this period between 1050 and 1250, it witnessed major developments in the visual culture of the Islamic world. Many of the extant monuments in brick that survived from period in Iran displays significant formal innovations and experiments and increased use of color glazed tiles as a result of the adoption of new ceramic technologies. So in Iran, we can see that during the Seljuks, 4 Ivan plan, pishtak, prominent minarets, and patterned brick bonds, mukarnas, geometrical stars, and also polygon patterns. All these were prominently used. So one major difference of the new frontier, that is Anatolia and India, is the main building tradition that was in stone. Unlike the predominant use of the brick in Iran and Central Asia, many forms that were imported to these frontier areas from the Iranian world became translated from brick to stone. In this process of translation, a different aesthetic mode was created. While the building tradition in India and Eastern Anatolia was completely in stone, but in Western Anatolia, namely in the former Byzantine lands, a combination of both stone and brick was used. While the Maghreb, that is North Africa, and Al-Andalus, that is in Iberian Peninsula, stucco and carved wooden or marble ornaments developed. In the Eastern Islamic world, there was a preference for stucco and brickwork with terracotta and blue glazed tiles as the decorative media. So until this time, the main building types in the Islamic lands were the palace and mosques. So although the mosques and palaces continued to be important, the building types became more diversified functionally. So new public service buildings appeared as a sign of just Islamic rulers, denoting urban amenities to the people. So not only in Anatolia, but also in Syria, Egypt, and also in Iran, several functional buildings emerged. So those included monumental mausoleums or the tombs, next the Sufi lodges, or they can be called as khanqa, and also madrasas means colleges. Then you have the hospitals, caravanserais. These building types were often combined in multifunctional complexes comprising the mausoleum of the founders. So the administration of these complexes was organized as a endowments, that is called waqf. Another main feature of this period was the mobility of artisans, artifacts, and technical knowledge among different regions. So the period of Seljuk rule is often understood as a Sunni revival. So the advent of Sunnism affected the art and architecture of that period. And another feature, major feature of this period was the increasing participation of elite women patrons into architecture. So coming to the Seljuks of Rum, the great Seljuks of Iran and Central Asia ruled in 1077 to 1308. So at that time, a branch of their family, together with other Turkic groups, conquered the Byzantine territories, that is in Anatolia. So Alauddin Kaykubat in 1220 to 37, he made Konya in central Anatolia the capital of the Seljuk of Rum. Seljuk of Rum means the Sultanate of Rome. Rum Seljuk architecture was formed through a synthesis of Islamic traditions with Byzantine, Armenian, and Georgian techniques and forms. So the functional building types and forms adopted from Iran, Syria, Iraq, and also Central Asia were translated in Anatolia primarily into stone. So this is the location with respect to the Islamic land here, this Seljuk of Rome. Next here, I have taken an example of a caravanserai. This was the period of the Fourth Crusade. Anatolia became a hub of international trade. The Rum Seljuks built many caravanserais on the main trade routes, such as Sultan Han, located on the Konya-Aksaray trade route in central Anatolia. Sultan Han is a two-courtyard. As you can see here, it's a two-courtyard structure. The first one has 4 Ivans. This 1, 2, 3, and the 4. So it has 4 Ivans. Ivans means it's an Iranian form. In the middle, you can see here, there is a prayer pavilion for the travelers. So the second courtyard here, this is closed and has a central dome. As you can see over here, this is a central dome with a conical, you can see over here, conical outer shell. So it is almost like a hypostyle mosque. Special guests would be lodged here, while commoners and servants, they used to stay in this open first courtyard, together with also some horses and pack animals. So regardless of their function, Rum Seljuk buildings in Anatolia all look alike from outside. So they each have a fortified look. They also have this projecting buttresses and also blind walls without any windows. So the monumental portals, here this is the portal, with Mukarna stalactile hoods are very recognizable, and marked all the road networks and cities of the region as signposts. So these distinctive portals appear on the mosques, madrasas, mausoleums, caravanserais, and hospitals. So hence visually unifying them. So this is a stone building, but all the decorative forms were derived from the brick and stucco ornaments of Syria, Iran, and also Iraq. So the building looks very austere, except for certain elements, especially its portal. Some parts of the building are decorated by a combination of calligraphy, geometry, and vegetal forms carved in low relief. In general, architectural facade of Rum Seljuk buildings are plain. Ornament is found for the most part around the portals, windows, and also in the interior mihrabs. So coming to the next example, this was the it's called Huang Hatun complex. Multifunctional complexes that consists of several functional buildings became prominent in this period, not only in Anatolia but also in Syria and Egypt. So this Huang Hatun complex is a significant example of Seljuk multifunctional complex in central Anatolia. The complex consists of a mosque. So this is the masjid, and it has a madrasa. This is a madrasa, and also this is a mausoleum attached to each other. Outside is a bathhouse, or it is also called as hammam, belonging to the same complex. So another remarkable feature of this period, as I told, it is the increasing number of female patrons of architecture. So the patron of this complex is Huang Hatun. She was the widow of Rum Seljuk ruler Alauddin Kaykubat. She was the daughter of Byzantine king of Alanya Castle and had been a Christian princess. She was converted to Islam and became a prominent Muslim queen. So here, the hypostyle mosque with pointed arches has multiple piers and columns taken as spolia from the Christian buildings of Anatolia, either Byzantine or maybe from Armenian. So here you can see this is the masjid, this is the mausoleum, this is the madrasa, and this is the hammam. The Queen's mausoleum over here is covered by a conical roof, as you can see here. This was common both in some of the Abbasid buildings of Iraq and also in Armenia. So here the conical roof is echoed by the conical shape of the adjacent portals. So these portals you can see also has the conical shaped with the mukarnas hood turned inside out. And this pencil shaped minaret is a later Ottoman period addition. After they became the rulers of this region, Ottomans, they repaired, reused, and also added new minarets to the earlier buildings. So the queen provided a bathhouse here outside the complex. It is a double bath with areas for men and also for women. So control of water was an important legal right of rulers, and to build a bathhouse or a fountain was a major public service for the community during those times. So here, the courtyard of the madrasa has Ivans. So this is the Ivan, a form that originates from Iran but has been translated into stone in Anatolia, also in Syria and Egypt. So an Ivan is a quadrangular hall or a space, usually vaulted and walled on three sides, with one side opening onto the closed courtyard or looking outwards to the landscape or cityscape. So here you can see the mukarnas. Mukarna portal of the mosque has a triangular hood with an inscription panel here. This is the inscription panel, and a combination of geometric and vegetal patterns that are carved in low relief. These carvings function like moldings that articulate the outlines of portals, arches, and other elements against the flat, undecorated wall surfaces. So the mausoleum of the queen mausoleum of the queen is raised on a plinth. Here you can see the plinth, like an honorable throne. So the plinth is also made of Mukarna frieze composed of corbelled niches, shapes resembling these stalactites. So it serves as a base for the raised octagonal mausoleum, which has also corner colonnades. So interlaced geometric carvings and low relief pointed arches with an upper Mukarnas frieze. So you can see the Mukarnas over here in this frieze. So the next example is the mosque and hospital complex of Devrigi. The city of Devrigi in eastern Anatolia was situated at the medieval frontier of Georgia and Armenia. So the complex consists of a mosque and a hospital built in 1228 and 29 respectively by Ahmed Shah and his wife Tarun Malik, two members of the regional Menguljekid dynasty. So this Menguljekid dynasty was the vassals of Seljuks. So here, the hypostyle mosque has 5 aisles consisting of 5 bays. So this is the mosque and this is the hospital. So the mosque, it has 5 bays and 5 aisles. And also it has the hemispherical domes here, dome in front of the mihrab. This is the mihrab and this is the Qibla wall. Marked externally by a conical roof. You can see a conical roof over here. The main portal, this is the main portal. This main portal of the mosque is at the north, which opens to the central aisle and culminating with the dome here. Once again, a thin cylindrical minaret. Here you can see this is the thin cylindrical minaret, which is located over here, is an Ottoman period addition. So the hospital is a variation of madrasa plan. It has multiple rooms and vaulted halls arranged around a covered courtyard with an oculus open to the sky. One of the rooms of the hospital over here functions as a mausoleum of the patrons. And this too is marked by a hemispherical dome, as you can see over here. So with an outer conical roof. It has a window here opening into the interior of the mosque from its Qibla wall. So the conical roofs highlight the most important points of the complex, thereby advertising these spaces externally from the outside. So coming to the portals of the complex has 4 portals. So here you can see this is this 1, 2, 3, and over here 4 portals it has. So 1 in the north, 2 in the west, and 1 in the south. So each one exhibit different styles as if the artists were trying out and experimenting with diverse forms. So on these portals, different decorative walls appear in stone. They are unique in the sense that they do not resemble anything that was built earlier or later anywhere else. So the portals of Seljuk buildings in central Anatolia have conical mukarnas roofs with linear borders that have low relief geometric and vegetal carvings. In contrast, here the portals of the Devrigi complex exhibit high relief carvings like sculptures. The forms are not bound by rectilinear door frames, but rather extend beyond the linear frames. In this period, Crusaders were present in and around Anatolia. They built Crusader castles in Syria, which featured the Gothic chapels. So artistic and architectural forms were exchanged between the existing cultures in Anatolia and the Crusaders. Not only did the Crusaders adopt the Islamic forms, such as the pointed arches, but also elements from Gothic architecture entered into the architectural idioms of Anatolia, Syria, and also in Egypt. So the unusual high relief carvings of the Devrigi complex can be understood within this historical context. So the hospital portal has been called as a Gothic portal. It looks like the portals of Romanesque and Gothic churches with rows of receding pilasters. So these are the receding pilasters, and unusual. It had an unusual capital on top of these pilasters, consisting of mukarnas and leaf-like forms. The Gothic portals also features unusual round discs in high relief. The leaf-like forms resembling Chinese lotuses suggest that artisans were coming from east, escaping the Mongol invasions. So Mongols were invading even the China. So such lotus and palmate forms exemplify artisanal creativity and emerged in this frontier zone where different cultures intermingled. So coming to the decorative elements, the foundation inscription of the mosque North Portal states that it was built by Ahmad Shah, son of Suleiman Shah. Another inscription above acknowledges the sovereignty of Alauddin Ayubad. So the Seljuk Sultan of the time, this shows the vassal status of the Mengülcekid dynasty. The decoration on the north portal consists of high relief carving, mostly enlarged vegetal motifs and prominent central hexagon, something like this. So coming to the figural imagery, throughout the Islamic lands, different attitudes towards the use of figural imagery existed. Under the Seljuks, there was a great flourishing of figural imagery, both in Iran and Anatolia. But some jurists declared that there are hadiths saying of Prophet Muhammad against the figural representation. So the presence of contradictory hadiths explains the wide variety of differing attitudes concerning the use of rejection of figural imagery. So this shows that there is no single or typical Islamic norm concerning figural representation. So the only common norm was the rejection of figural motifs in the mosques, also near the religious spaces, and in illuminations of Quran or other religious texts. So they should not be using any figural images along with the inscriptions of Quranic verses. In the Devrigi complex, figural motifs appear on the external walls and portals of the mosque. Single and double-headed eagles, as you can see here, which were also used on coins as sultanic symbols, appear on the relief carvings on the western gate. So some hadiths allow figural motifs if they have leaf-like members, so thereby departing from naturalistic representations. So coming to the facial representations, scholars have noted that faces were carved on the portals of the hospital. Some of these faces were later chipped off and defaced by those who were apparently opposed to figural representation. So the example here you can see about the face of a woman with a long braid wearing a crown whose face has been chipped. So lower part of the same hospital portal are with two triangles in between which two faces have been carved. So Albert Gabriel, who made the drawing, interpreted them as the faces of male and female patrons of the complex. And these triangles resembles the instruments used by the masons, maybe triangular set square. So coming to the next topic, that is Seljuks and new frontiers in the Anatolia and India. So in this part, we'll explore cultural connections and interactions between the two frontiers of Islam, namely Anatolia and India, through the newly emerging architectural styles, forms, and decorative programs in both regions. So here, let's understand the map here with the Delhi Sultanate, the map of Delhi Sultanate. So this was the territory ruled by the Sultanate of Delhi under Khiljis, and then you have the territory of Akbar at the end of 16th century, Then you have the Mughal Empire in 1630. And here you can see the Anatolia. We will be like both together analyzing both Anatolia and India together. So this is Seljuks of Rum. Their capital was the Konya, and Seljuks of Iran capital was Isfahan. Post-Mongol, you can see the fragmentation of the all these dynasties. This was the Mongol Ilkhanate during the 1300. So let's understand a little bit of background here. Anatolia and India are two new frontier regions which did not come into the Islamic fold until 11th century. So, however, they share similar developments such as being ruled by Turkic dynasties with a Persianate cultural orientation, and the creative translation of imported Islamic architectural traditions into local vernacular forms and material. So the Eastern Islamic world after the 11th century increasingly adopted Persianate culture. All of the dynasties that ruled in Anatolia, Iran, India, and Central Asia after 11th century were ethnically either they were Turks or Mongols. Then the Chinese influence coming into with the Mongols after mid 13th century further transformed the Eastern Islamic world. So Chinese motifs such as dragons, phoenixes, winged angels, cloud bands, and floral designs dominated by lotuses entered the post-Mongol artistic idiom of the Islamic East. So these forms were limited to the Eastern Islamic Persianate lands. So during the post-Mongol period, the Silk trade with China and Iran began to extend to Anatolia and Syria. Italian and French Crusader kingdoms had their agents buying silk and spices in cities or ports along east-west trade routes. So this was a period when cultural exchanges flowed back and forth within an expansive Eurasian geography. So coming to the architectural practices and materials in the new frontier, Anatolia and India, in northern India, the earlier monuments show preferences for brick architecture that was long established in the Persianate world. On the other hand, the tradition of building in stone had been developed before by North Indian stone masons who worked for Hindu patrons before the Islamization of the region. So unlike Iran and Central Asia, Anatolia and India were mostly stone construction regions. In contrast to Western Anatolia, where brick was also used, Eastern Anatolia was primarily stone-based region. But in general, stone and brick combination was common in Anatolia. Tile work and the colored ceramics were used frequently along with brick and stone work. However, in India, mostly stone and some stucco were the main construction materials. A common feature of India and Anatolia was the frequent use of spolia, that is the reused materials from earlier buildings. Another shared feature was the cross-fertilization of local and trans-regional forms. So after the Mongol incursions, many groups migrated to Anatolia and India. So strikingly, similar artistic and architectural forms began to appear in both the regions. So coming to the example of Great Seljuks of Iran, the Great Mosque of Isfahan is the first mosque to use a 4 Ivan plan with small domes all around. So this is 4 Ivan plan. This is 1 Ivan, second, third, and the 4th Ivan. And it also had a lot of small domes all around. The prayer hall here in the south is covered by a large brick dome. So Ivan is a rectangular vaulted hall or a space walled on 3 sides with one open end. It was a significant architectural element in Iran. used in palaces and also in caravanserais before being adopted in mosques and madrasas. So the form spread to eastern and western Islamic lands from 11th century onwards. The Iwan is an appropriate form for the climate of Iran also. It creates shade without being closed up and is open to the winds. The building has a very complex history with several additions in different periods. It is built in a brick, which is the common construction material in Iran, and the usage of baked brick enabled the development of a set of formal devices such as squinches, mukarnases, domes, and also decorative programs seen in this great mosque of Isfahan. The Seljuk period mosque has only stucco and patterned brick ornaments. Later on, you can see surfaces were decorated with colored glazed tile works. So here you can see the south dome in brick over the prayer hall of the Great Mosque of Isfahan, which was translated into stone with the south dome of the Mosque of Devrigi. So this is the Mosque of Isfahan in Iran, and this is in Devrigi in Anatolia. So the material used here was brick, and here material used was stone. So you can see the transformation of material. So this is the Seljuks of Rum Alauddin Kaikubad, the Great Mosque in Konya. This is one more example. The Seljuks of Rum established Konya in central Anatolia as their capital during 13th century. Conical outer roofs are encountered in Devrigi and Konya as well as in other Rum Seljuk monuments in Anatolia. So this form was used in both some of the Abbasids in Iraq and also in Armenian churches. So various additions were done to this great mosque. So this mosque is also known as Alauddin Mosque in Konya. This was the oblong hypostyle plan. It was again expanded with the addition of domed space over here in front of the mihrab. So this was the Qibla wall. And it had two polygonal tombs, tomb towers overlooking the courtyard, contained the dynastic sarcophage. Sarcophage means the coffins of Rum Seljuks. So here you can see that coffins. This is the octagonal towers tombs. This was the early mosque and extended, and this is the mihrab area. And this was the courtyard. So coming to the Turkish slave sultans in India, little bit of historical context. At the beginning of 11th century, Turkish Sultan Mehmud of Ghazni took control of the western Punjab. He extended the Muslim political control into Indian territories. At the end of 12th century, the Ghurid sultans had overthrown the Ghaznavids. The Ghurids were a dynasty of Iranian descent. Most of North India had been brought under Ghurid control and Islamized in this period. So Delhi emerged as the capital of an independent sultanate by 1220. The reign of Alauddin Kaikubad was the high point of the Seljuks of Rum. In the same period in India, the former Turkish slaves of the Ghaznavids and of the dynasties ruling in today's Afghanistan and Pakistan region established what is known as Delhi Sultanate. Delhi became the capital of the slave sultans. As in Anatolia, Indian territories had an ethnically and religiously diverse population. In Indian territories under the Ghurids and Delhi sultans bear similar characteristics to Anatolia as a frontier region of the Islamic world. Both newly Islamized regions had large contingents of non-Muslim populations. So Christians and Jews in Anatolia, Hindus and Jains in India. So in this part, we will discuss connective approach that aims to understand the monuments of these two regions in a comparative fashion. So let's understand the development in art and architecture. As in Anatolia, Islamic architecture in India incorporated a variety of different regional traditions. It was a synthesis of local Northwest Indian building traditions and practices, with forms and functions imported from Iran and Central Asia. Most of the Islamic monuments that survive today from this period are mosques and tombs of members of ruling elites and also of Sufi saints. The traditional building materials of the Indus Valley was brick, similar to Iran. On the other hand, stone was the primary building material of the east of the Indus. Frequent usage of spolia from Hindu and Jain temples was a significant element of the Islamic architectural culture in this region. Especially in the east of the Indus, usage of arches, that is ogee arches, pointed arches, lobed arches, and also walls like domical and lantern was frequent. So in the Indus Valley, facade decoration is executed in decorative brickwork. In the region of Delhi, for the most part, relief carved stone is apparent. Also in the region of Delhi, epigraphic borders of knotted and foliated Arabic script are juxtaposed with relief carved ornamental forms such as vines, flowers, and lotus, also medallions associated with Hindu cosmology. So here in an example for Ghazni minaret, this was in mid 12th century in Afghanistan. Ghazni minarets are two decorated minaret towers in central Afghanistan. They are around 600 meters apart and both are around 20 meters long and built of fired mud bricks. Both are built on the star-shaped plan. The surfaces of the towers are decorated with elaborate geometric and vegetal patterns accompanied by Quranic inscriptions on terracotta. So coming to the Qutub Minar in Delhi, Qutub Minar was commissioned by Qutubuddin Aibak in 1206 and 1211. It is located in the eastern side of the Great Mosque of Delhi. It is too high to be used by the muezzin for the call for prayer. Rather, it has a symbolic function proclaiming the victory or the pole of Islam. So its design was influenced by the Ghazni towers. It has a circular plan and is around 72.3 meters long. It is built of ashlar masonry, while on the first 3 stories, red sandstone. So these 3 stories, red sandstone was used. Upper 2 are used by the white marble. Here, each story has a different design. Balconies are supported by carved and inscribed arch motifs simulating muqarnases, as you can see here. So each story is decorated with bands of cursive inscriptions, including Quranic verses and an account of the construction of the minaret. Many non-figural motifs are derived from the local decoratives along with the Islamic vegetal designs. So here you can see example of Qutub Minar and also Antalya Alauddin Kaikubad Mosque, which is a fluted minaret in Rum Seljuk. Many parallels can be found between the Qutub Minar in Delhi and this particular Kaikubad's mosque in Antalya, Anatolia, in terms of materiality and also in terms of decorations and forms. So coming to the Qutub complex, this Qutub complex is comprised of a mosque over here, and it has 2 minarets, tomb and a madrasa. The mosque was entered via 4 monumental gates. Today only southern gate remains. The mosque was extended by rulers who succeeded Qutubuddin Aibak. The mosque exemplifies common characteristics of Ghurid and early Delhi Sultanate mosque architecture, with its portico, enclosed courtyard, hypostyle prayer hall, and use of spolia. The Qutub Mosque was constructed as a congregational mosque. The core of the mosque that stands today consists of a rectangular courtyard with a trabeate. Trabeate means post and lintel construction. Porticos on three sides. The prayer hall is on the west. So hypostyle prayer hall has 4 bays and aisles running parallel to the Qibla wall. So the bays were covered with domes again. So this is a Qibla screen which was added in 1199. The screen is decorated in carved relief, which consists of vegetal and floral motifs and Quranic inscriptions in Tugra and Nashq script. The vegetal and floral motifs such as vines, floral medallions are derived from Indic decorative patterns. The dynamic sculptural treatments indicate that local artisans were employed in the construction of the building. Iltutmish in 1211 to 1236, who was the slave of Qutbuddin Aibak, became his son-in-law, extended the mosque further eastward, and he added 2 more Qibla screens. So the decorative program of Iltutmish's Qibla screen displays differences from the earlier Qibla screen. The calligraphy is more flattened rather than sculptural forms. Low relief, geometric and vegetal motifs are carved on a single flat surface. Iltutmish's screen displays close parallel with the low relief carvings in stone of Rum Seljuk monuments. So here you can see the Rum Seljuk inscriptions and also the decorations, and these are the decorations and inscriptions of Iltutmish. This is the mausoleum of Iltutmish, which is located in the northern extension of Qutb complex. The exterior of the tomb is plain, but interior is elaborately ornamented with geometrical and floral motifs in low relief carving. So it is an example of canopy tomb. It has axial entrances on north, south, and east with corbelled ogee arches. So now we will start with the next part of this session, that is the Mongols and Ilkhanids. So we'll try to understand the relation between the portable and permanent architecture here. So in this part of the session, we will explore how new kinds of cities and palaces developed under Mongols to reflect forms of cultural and artistic adaptations and assimilations. These adaptations were driven by Mongol lifestyles who were nomadic, and the sedentary territories over which they ruled. So how do we define permanent and portable architecture? We will try to understand this question here. This also would be one of the question for today's assignment. So another part of what we will focus on today involves the very close connections that are established between Kubilai Khan, the great Khan of China, and Mongolia, and the lands of Greater Iran ruled over by the Ilkhanid dynasty, founded by Hulagu Kublai Khan's brother. So some of the useful terms: Nasil means it's a cloth of gold, and Kesi means it's a tapestry view. Ordu means it's a nomadic encampment, like something like a tent. Lajwardina means a deep blue colored stone used to make a glaze for ceramics. Strap work means a pattern composed of overlapping interwoven strips, often in a geometric composition. So here we'll just understand a little bit of highlights of Ilkhanids. The Mongol dynasty was founded by Genghis Khan. So Genghis Khan, he was not a Muslim. He was practicing the Shamism. Shamism means something like an animistic god they had. They were the nomads and also illiterates, but they had a high skill of archery and horse riding, and they were very strong physically. and they were they wanted to erase Islam from the Islamic lands. So Genghis Khan in the late 12th century in northeastern Asia conquered and united much of Eastern and Central Asia within his lifetime. Yuan dynasty was established by his grandson Kublai Khan. They have captured the China also, and there they established Yuan dynasty. So the Mongols acquired seized weaponry that allowed them to take the city of Baghdad and put the Abbasid caliphates to an end. That was in 1258. The Ilkhanids here, they are the descendants from a branch of Genghis Khan's family, were formed by his grandson Hulagu, who conquered Iran and Iraq. The Ilkhanids were the vassals of Yuan dynasty, and under Ghazan Khan, things changed from 1295 onwards. With his conversion to Islam, some new features were introduced into architecture and city planning. So this is a painting predicting the siege of Baghdad in 12th century. Here in this map demonstrates the world empire whose formation started under Genghis Khan. It was expanded and steadily developed by his sons and their successors. So here we will try to understand the Mongol Empire in Iran, just as China sponsored works of art and architecture as a way of both enhance prestige and political power. So here we will try to answer what do we mean when we say soft and hard architecture. Soft architecture is portable in nature and is made up of components including various kinds of textiles and wooden poles that provide support for tents, awnings, and also cloth walls. Hard architecture means it falls under the traditional understanding of architecture, that is permanent materials used to construct a standing, immovable structure. So let's understand the tents and textiles in Mongols. The tents were as complex as forms of fixed architecture, ornamented with ornate textiles and framed with tartari cloth. So these were textiles that often incorporated great quantities of silk threads wrapping with a beaten metallic foil, which produced complex patterned cloth. Textiles were highly functional. Not only were they portable, but they could also signify social orders for display in both soft and hard architecture. The political and social lives of the Mongols elites took place for almost in this part of the tents, within the tents and encampments, or it is also called as Ordu. So here you can see a picture of elite Mongol dress. These paintings of Mongol enthronement depict female consorts wearing extraordinary hats. The hats were fabricated from tree bark and branches and covered in red silk as a marker of elite Mongol women. Coming to the country life and seasonal nomadism, the ruler of this Mongols migrated with his Ordu. It is also called as horde or headquarters or also encampment or even an imperial palace. So Ordu included wives, family, servants, advisors, guards, and the army, and there were officials who were chiefly responsible for directing the installment of new camps because they were nomadic. So country life was also conducted in these camps, just as it might be conducted in a city. So the treasury also migrated with the ruler. Marriages and deaths also were celebrated and commemorated. Feasts and hunts were enjoyed. So here you can see the pictures of the Ordu. So here I'm going to take example of Ilkhanid cities. Some of the highlights of Ilkhanid cities, like the Mongols in Iran established new kinds of relations with the land's geography. Two major cities established by the Ilkhanids were Takhte Suleiman and Sultaniya. Sultaniya combined a fixed urban center with a pastoral peripheral zone where tented encampments could be erected. So here we'll come to Takhte Suleiman. This was built as a summer palace by Ilkhanid ruler Abaka in 1271, 1265 to 1282 he ruled. So from 1271 onwards, the site of Takhte Suleiman was completed by his son Orgun Khan. The site had been developed by the Sasanian dynasty prior to the conquest of Islam. The Sasanians constructed walls around the perimeter of the elevated site and built a fire temple and audience chamber to the north. Over here, this is the north. The Mongol palace was built over this sacred fire. So the Sasanians were following the Zoroastrian faith. So they had the sacred fire over there. So Mongols, they built their over this sacred fire here. When Mongols decided to develop this site, they were already working with a space of historical significance, but one that had been abandoned in the centuries of Islamic rule. At the core of this miniature city palace, the Mongols redeveloped the courtyard. So this is the courtyard. You will understand here. This is the courtyard. Orienting it north and south. This orientation followed a Mongol practice of setting up their tents with their entrances facing the south. So they organized a new courtyard around this lake with Ivans on the southern and eastern, also in the northern sides of the, and also they had marked the arcades on their perimeters. Behind the North Ivan, that is here, behind this North Ivan, there was a domed chamber built over the former Sasanian fire temple, which became Abaka's room of audience. This was a place where the Ilkhanid ruler would receive visitors and make public audience. Behind the Ivan of the West, over here, there was a complex structure composed of two octagonal pavilions interconnected by a room. These are thought to have been accommodations for the Mongol ruler and his immediate family members. These were the main features built under Abaka and his son. This had been where the Sasanian king Khusro had his throne room. Maybe this was in around 3rd century, something like that, previously during the Sasanian period. Here, Takhte Suleiman included kiosks and palaces, palace hall, or even it can be called as audience chamber, built at the site. Each one of these spaces was covered by a dome. So lower section was riveted in colored ceramic components, and the upper section, it was whitewashed and also plastered. Some zones, near the zone of transitions, they also used mukarnas. North and south octagon, they had windows weaving to the palace ground landscape. So the selection of octagonal shape reflects the translation of a tented form into the fixed architectural form. So coming to the tile motifs and themes, dragons and phoenixes were auspicious creatures in the Chinese tradition and were some of the oldest and most popular symbols of sovereignty in China. So those were used on the tiles. Coming to the decorative elements, in the interior of the domed chamber were sumptuous decorated. The south octagon had tiles set into the upper walls, other zones plastered, as well as mukarnas executed the plaster. So here you can see the star-shaped and also cross-shaped tiles appeared at the northern kiosk in a technique called Lajwardina. So some of these tiles are made from the dark blue material of lapis lazuli and others in cobalt, a sky blue color. So these are contrasted with tiles executed in a technique called luster, resembling the metalwork with the polychrome glazes. So here we can see that there is a great deal of technological skill evidences in these tiles. So here these motifs reflected those found in textiles, tapestries, and also embroideries from China and also from Iran of the same period. We can see how these techniques were employed to embellish the effects of the architecture by having a sculpted surface in relief. The tiles picked up light and created a shimmering effect for the weavers. Next, coming to the figural tiles, another complex kind of cultural assimilation seen in Takht Sulaiman are molded and polychrome tiles with selective gilding. These tiles show friezes of animals, flowers, and also figures. In the main field, one finds a succession of figures hunting, riding, and also holding a falcon, another with a cheetah, etc. So we find the same designs of phoenixes and dragons in the Takht Sulaiman as textiles from China. So this is how we can relate the soft architecture influences over hard architecture. So thank you for today's session. We have completed almost these topics. And in tomorrow's session, we will be looking into Timurid cities in Iran and Central Asia. And today's assignment have given 3 questions. One is, in what ways did the multicultural environments of Anatolia and India inform architectural forms and practices? And second is, how were architectural forms in Greater Iran translated and adopted in the regional architectural idioms of Anatolia and India? What was the role of available materials such as brick, stone, and glazed tiles in this process of translation? And the third question is from the Mongols, how do we define permanent and portable architecture? So you can answer in your own words, and also please don't download from the internet directly and copy paste the answer. Try to compose your answers by yourself and also make good abstract sketches. So now I'll hand over the mic to Dr. Bujan.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot, ma'am. And if there are, if you can see in the chat box, there are a few questions. One by Prachi. Okay, in the last session discussed about twisted shell-like minarets. Do such a structure exist in India? Will you please see in chat box?
The curving towers, what you are asking, which we saw in Baghdad, in Iraq. So those were only found in 3 mosques. That is in Samarra, 2 mosques, and also in Tulunit. Tulunit's mosque of Tulun, Ibn Tulun. Yes, the Iwan is suitable for the weather in Iran because it's an open structure. Iran means it's very hot over there, and this Iwan is an open structure, and it is closed on 3 sides. Only one side it is open. So you can say that there is a shadow. Also at the same time, wind is coming. So at some points they have created these kind of Iwans. It is suitable for this hot climate. Turkish triangles that you can see in the mosque in this Devrigi Hospital complex. You had the mosque and the hospital, right? In that mosque, you had 5 aisles and 5 bays. So there they had created these Turkish triangles. Okay. Yeah, I was rushing because of time constraint. We have covered almost many topics.
In such a little bit time, we have to cover too many topics.
Yeah.
So it's very true. Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. And now here the questions are over. So with the kind permission of all of you, now we'll stop here. Tomorrow we'll meet again. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.